The first thing to break the surface of his consciousness was the cold. Not the crisp, sterile chill of an overzealous climate control system, but a damp, parasitic cold that seemed to seep from the very bones of the world. Elias Vance pried his eyelids open, a sensation like peeling old tape from a dusty surface. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, the ghost of a vintage he couldn't recall drinking. The ceiling above him was not the familiar, vaulted expanse of his penthouse bedroom, with its recessed starlight projection. It was a jaundiced, water-stained plane, a cracked geography of misery. A single, naked bulb dangled from a frayed cord, its filament a weak, orange pulse against the gloom. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He sat bolt upright, the movement sending a jolt of agony through his back. The bed, no, not a bed, a lumpy mattress on a creaking metal frame, groaned in protest. The sheets were coarse, smelling faintly of mildew and someone else's sweat. He looked down at his hands. They were his hands. He recognized the long fingers of a man who had never known a day of manual labor, the faint scar on his left thumb from a childhood fencing accident. But they were grimy. Dirt was etched into the lines of his knuckles. His nails were ragged and dark. He was wearing a threadbare t-shirt, its faded logo for a band he'd never heard of peeling away like sunburnt skin. Elias. The voice was not his wife, Helena's, with its melodic, silver spoon cadence. This voice was rougher, edged with a chronic weariness. He turned. A woman sat at a small, rickety table in the corner of the cramped room. She was thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. In her lap, a small boy, no older than 5, was listlessly pushing a piece of dry toast around a chipped plate. They were strangers, absolute strangers, huddled in the intimate space of a bedroom that was not his. Who are you?" Elias's voice was a dry rasp. "Where am I? Where's my wife?" The woman's brow furrowed in a look of genuine concern, a look that unnerved him more than any overt threat. "Leo, are you all right? You were tossing and turning all night. Said you had another nightmare." She gestured around the squalid room. "You're home. I'm here. Finn's here." Leo. The name hit him like a physical blow. He scrambled off the mattress, his bare feet recoiling from the splintered, icy floorboards. He saw a shard of a mirror hanging from a nail on the wall and lurched towards it. The face that stared back was his own, yet horrifyingly altered. It was Elias Vance, 42 years old, founder of the global tech giant Aura. The same high cheekbones, the same sharp jawline, the same piercing gray eyes. But this version of him was gaunt, his skin sallow. New lines of exhaustion were carved around his eyes, and a 2-day stubble shadowed a jaw that was usually impeccably clean-shaven. He looked defeated. He looked like one of the countless faces he would pass in the lower districts, a face he was conditioned to ignore, to see as part of the city's unfortunate, but necessary, backdrop. "No," he whispered, touching his own unfamiliar reflection. "No, this is wrong. This is all wrong." He spun around, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and terror. The room was a prison cell of poverty. A single window showed a grimy brick wall just inches away. The air was thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and damp. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a kidnapping. This felt fundamental, as if the universe itself had been rewritten around him. "I need to make a call," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old authority. "My phone. Where's my phone?" The woman, who had called him Leo, pointed to a battered, plastic-cased device charging on the floor. It was an ancient model, something his company had rendered obsolete a decade ago. He snatched it up, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar interface. He didn't know the passcode. He didn't know any of the numbers in the contacts. Foreman Graves. Mama. Pawnbroker. His heart hammered against his ribs. He threw the phone down and lunged for the door, yanking it open. He found himself in a narrow, dimly lit hallway that stank of urine and decay. Doors identical to his lined the passage, a chorus of muffled coughs and arguments leaking from behind them. This was a tenement building, a slum. He stumbled down a flight of rickety stairs and burst out into the street. The world that greeted him was a nightmare canvas painted in shades of gray and brown. The sky was a sheet of lead, choked with the perpetual smog of the industrial sector. Towering, skeletal structures, the infamous stacks, blotted out the sun, housing tens of thousands in vertical squalor. The air was a toxic cocktail of factory exhaust and rot. People shuffled past him, their faces hollow, their bodies stooped. They were the underclass, the dregs of the economic machine he had helped to build. And they all wore the same expression of weary resignation he had just seen in his own reflection. He needed to get to his tower. Vance Tower, the gleaming spear of chrome and glass that pierced the heavens in the city's heart, a monument to his success. It was miles away, a different galaxy. He started running, his bare feet screaming in protest against the broken pavement and gritty streets. He ran with the wild desperation of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. After what felt like an eternity, gasping for breath in the polluted air, he reached the periphery of the financial district. And there he saw it. A massive public view screen, mounted on the side of the building, was broadcasting the morning news. The anchorwoman, with her perfect smile and synthetic cheer, was talking. And in corporate news, visionary CEO Elias Vance of Aura announced a groundbreaking new philanthropic initiative today. The Empathy Mandate, he calls it, a program designed to bridge the gap between the city's sectors. Speaking from his breathtaking penthouse this morning, Vance, alongside his beautiful wife, Helena, pledged to personally oversee the project. The camera zoomed in on a man standing on a balcony that Elias knew better than his own heartbeat. It was his balcony, and standing there, waving to the cameras, was a man with his face. No, not his face. It was a different man, broader, with coarser features and calloused-looking hands. But he was wearing Elias's custom-tailored suit. And beside him, smiling radiantly, was his wife, Helena. Only it wasn't Helena. It was the tired, worn-out woman from the tenement apartment. She was transformed, dressed in an elegant silk gown, her hair styled, her face glowing with a vitality he couldn't comprehend. The little boy, Finn, stood between them, now dressed in expensive clothes, looking happy and healthy. The world tilted on its axis. Elias fell to his knees on the grimy sidewalk, the jeers of passers-by fading into a dull roar. He was watching his life being lived by someone else. He was a ghost, trapped on the wrong side of reality. He wasn't kidnapped. He wasn't dreaming. He had been replaced. An exchange had been made. A soul for a soul. He looked down at his own trembling, dirt-caked hands, then back at the screen where the man who had stolen his life was being hailed as a saint. This wasn't just a loss of wealth. It was a loss of self, an erasure. He was no one. And as the broadcast continued, lauding the new, compassionate Elias Vance, a single, terrifying question began to form in the ruins of his mind. If that man was him, then who, or what had he now become? The days that followed were a brutal education in the physics of a world turned upside down. The initial shock had frozen into a cold, hard knot of dread in Elias's gut, a constant companion in this new, suffocating reality. He learned that his new name was Leo Kolchak. He learned that the weary woman was his wife, Maya, and the boy was his son, Finn. He learned that he worked a 12-hour shift at the Amalgamated Metalworks, Sector 7, a monstrous, smoke-belching beast of a factory that was the black heart of this district. These were not facts he accepted, but blows he endured. Each morning, Maya would wake him with a gentle shake, her eyes full of a tired tenderness that felt like a judgment. He was a phantom in this family, a usurper in the body of a man he did not know, and their quiet acceptance of him was the most maddening thing of all. His first day at the factory was a descent into a Dantean hell. The moment he stepped through the gates, the sheer volume of the place assaulted him. A deafening symphony of screeching metal, the volcanic hiss of hydraulics, and the rhythmic, earth-shaking slam of industrial presses. The air was thick with the taste of ozone and hot iron, a metallic dust that coated his tongue and grated in his lungs. Men and women, their faces smudged with grease and sweat, moved like ghosts in a machine, their movements economical and weary. They were cogs, and Elias, No, Leo was now one of them. He was assigned to the scrap line, a conveyor belt that carried a ceaseless river of discarded metal, twisted girders, sheared pipes, the metallic skeletons of old machines. His job, as explained by a grizzled foreman named Graves, was to sort the copper from the steel, the aluminum from the iron, with his bare hands. The metal was often sharp, and within the first hour his soft, uncalloused hand were crisscrossed with bleeding cuts. The pain was sharp, but it was the humiliation that burned deeper. He, Elias Vance, who had once reshaped global markets with a single command, was now a scavenger, picking through the refuse of the very world he had built. It was here, amidst the grime and the noise, that he first truly encountered the new laws of this inverted society. During the midday break, the workers were herded into a bleak canteen. A thin, nutrient pay soup was ladled into bowls. Before they could eat, a screen flickered to life on the wall. It showed the face of the man, now wearing his name, the new Elias Vance. The imposter. A message from our benefactor, Foreman Graves bellowed over the murmuring crowd. The imposter's face filled the screen. He spoke with a folksy, unpolished charisma that Elias found repulsive. "Friends, workers, brothers and sisters of the city," he began. "I remember what it's like. I remember the gnawing in your belly, the ache in your back. I haven't forgotten. That's why we have the empathy mandate." He went on to explain the system. A significant portion of corporate profits, asterisk his asterisk profits, were now redirected into social programs, public housing, and worker benefits. But it came with a price. This was not charity. It was a transaction. The price was gratitude. "Your productivity is a measure of your appreciation," the imposter said, his smile never wavering. "Every piece of metal you sort, every gear you turn, is a thank you to the society that now cares for you. We monitor this. We reward it. Those who show the most gratitude will be elevated. Those who don't, well, we must all contribute to the new harmony." After the broadcast, Graves walked the tables, a handheld scanner in his hand. This was a gratitude audit. He scanned a chip embedded in each worker's wrist, a chip Elias discovered he now had. A number flashed on the screen. Graves would nod or grunt in disapproval. "Call Chalk," he barked, arriving at Elias's table. He scanned his wrist. The number was pitifully low. Graves sneered. "Daydreaming again, Leo? Your gratitude levels are pathetic. Remember what the benefactor says. A lazy hand is an ungrateful heart. Ungrateful hearts don't get priority for medical rations or housing improvements. Get your numbers up, or you'll be dragging your whole family down with you." The threat was clear. This wasn't a meritocracy of skill or intelligence. It was a tyranny of enforced emotion. The new rich, the former poor, had not abolished the system of control. They had simply rebranded it. Instead of being crushed by an uncaring system of capital, the workers were now suffocated by a demand for performative thankfulness. It was a more insidious prison, one where your very feelings were subject to audit. This empathy mandate was a masterstroke of psychological control, and Elias felt a sickening, grudging respect for the twisted genius behind it. It was exactly the kind of elegant, terrifying system he himself might have designed. That evening, he returned to the tenement, his body a single, unified scream of pain. His hands were raw, his back felt broken. Maya was waiting for him. She said nothing about his state, but gently took his hands and began cleaning the cuts with a rag and a weak antiseptic that stung like fire. Her touch was methodical, practiced. "You have to be more careful, Leo," she said softly, her eyes fixed on his wounds. "The foreman can dock your pay for injuries. He'll say you were careless, that you're damaging company assets." "Company assets?" Elias scoffed, the sound bitter. "We're not assets. We're the fuel. We're being burned to keep their new, comfortable world warm." Maya looked up, and for a moment he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not surprise, but a deep, resonant sadness. "Fuel burns out," she whispered. "We have to last. For Finn, the boy." Finn was the anchor that moored this strange new life in a semblance of reality. He was a quiet child, with large, observant eyes that seemed to see right through Elias's facade. That night, Finn had a coughing fit, a dry, rattling sound that shook his small frame. Maya held him, rocking him, her face a mask of helpless fear. "It's the dust from the works," she explained to Elias, her voice strained. "The air here, it gets in their lungs. The clinic has medicine, but our gratitude rating is too low this month. We're on the waiting list." The words struck Elias with the force of a physical blow. A child was sick, and his cure was dependent on a computer algorithm measuring his father's, or the man who was supposed to be his father's, factory performance. In his old life, he could have bought the entire pharmaceutical company with a phone call. Now, he couldn't even get basic medicine for a suffering child. The sheer, staggering injustice of it all ignited a rage within him, a fire that burned away some of the fog of his despair. This wasn't just about him anymore. He lay awake, long after Maya and Finn had fallen into a fitful sleep, the boy's raspy breaths filling the small room. He stared at the cracked ceiling, his mind racing. He had been so focused on what he had lost, his name, his wealth, his identity. But now he saw the other side of the coin, what he had gained. He had gained a first-hand view of the monstrous machine he had lorded over. He had seen the human cost of the numbers on his balance sheets. The externalities his board members used to dismiss were now the air he breathed, the cuts on his hands, the sickness in a child's lungs. The great inversion had not just stolen his life. It had thrust him into the very consequences of that life. He thought about the imposter, the new Elias Vance, speaking of empathy from the sterile comfort of his, Elias's penthouse. Did he truly remember? Did he remember this cold, this damp, this fear? Or had the comfort and the power already begun to erase the memory, like a rising tide washing away footprints in the sand? He ran a hand over his face, the rough stubble a constant reminder of his new station. He had to do something. He couldn't just survive here. He had to fight back. But how? He was one man, stripped of every tool he had ever known. He was a ghost and nobody. As his fingers traced the unfamiliar lines on his face, they brushed against a small, hard object in the pocket of the grimy trousers he'd been given. He pulled it out. It was a small, smooth river stone, and carved into its surface was a simple, elegant symbol, a spiral, interwoven with a straight line. He recognized it instantly. It was the logo of his first failed startup, a company he'd founded in college, a symbol of his youthful ambition. He had kept a paperweight with that design on his desk for 20 years. What was it doing here, in the pocket of a poor factory worker named Leo Kolchak? It made no sense. It was a piece of him, a fragment of his true past, stranded here in this nightmare present. Had he put it there himself, in a moment he couldn't remember? Or had someone else put it there? A cold chill ran down his spine, a feeling entirely different from the ever-present cold of the room. It was the chill of a dawning, terrifying possibility. What if he wasn't the only one who remembered? The small, carved stone became his talisman, a secret anchor in the churning sea of his new existence. He would turn it over and over in his pocket during the grueling hours on the scrap line. The smooth, cool surface, a tangible link to a self that felt increasingly like a dream. The symbol, that intertwined spiral and line, was a ghost from his own history, a private joke that had once represented the chaotic dance of creativity and the linear path of business. Here, in this world of brute force and grim survival, it felt like a message from another dimension. Its presence suggested a crack in the flawless facade of the inversion, a hint that memory, true memory, was not so easily erased. His internal world became a battleground. During the day, he was Leo Kolchak, a machine of flesh and bone, his mind dulled by exhaustion and the rhythmic clang of the factory. He learned to anticipate the lurch of the conveyor, the specific weight of copper versus steel. He learned to keep his head down during the gratitude audits, focusing his thoughts on a single, burning point of anger to keep despair from registering on the foreman scanner. He was learning the art of invisibility, the survival instinct of the prey. But at night, in the suffocating stillness of the tenement, Elias Vance would claw his way back to the surface. Sleep offered no escape, only a different kind of torture. He didn't dream of his old life. He relived it in excruciating, high-definition detail. He would stand on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights a glittering carpet at his feet, the taste of a 25-year-old single malt on his tongue. He would feel the cool, supple leather of his limousine's interior, the silent hum of its engine a lullaby of power. He would see his true wife, Helena, not the transfigured, beatific Madonna on the news screen, but the real Helena, sharp, witty, ambitious, a partner in his empire. He remembered their arguments, their laughter, their quiet, shared ambition. These weren't just memories of luxury. They were memories of a life, a complex tapestry of love, struggle, and triumph. Waking up from these visions was a fresh bereavement every morning. The rough texture of the blanket and the smell of decay a brutal confirmation of his exile. His greatest torment, however, was the ghost of his son, Julian. In his old life, Julian was a 14-year-old boy living in a gilded cage. Elias had provided him with everything: the best schools, the most advanced tech, a future secured by a mountain of wealth. But he had failed to give him his time. He remembered Julian trying to show him a piece of music he'd composed, and Elias, distracted by a falling stock price, had waved him away. He remembered Julian's excitement over a school science project, an excitement that had withered under Elias's uninterested gaze. He had seen his son as a legacy to be managed, an heir to be groomed, not a boy to be loved. Now, that ghost was his constant accuser. In the quiet moments, he would watch Finn, Maya's son. He saw the way the boy's eyes would light up when Maya would save a small piece of fruit for him from her own meager portion. He saw the fierce, protective love in her gaze as she read to him from a tattered picture book, her voice soft and patient. He saw a bond he had never managed to forge with his own child. This new family, which he had initially seen as a part of his prison, was now a mirror reflecting his own profound failures as a father and a husband. One evening, Finn was sitting on the floor, trying to build a small tower out of discarded bottle caps. The structure was unstable, collapsing every few seconds. The boy's frustration grew, his face crumpling as he was about to sweep them away in anger. Elias, watching from his corner, felt a strange impulse. He got down on the floor, the movement sending a protest through his aching joints. "You have to build a wider base," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Like a pyramid. That's the strongest shape." He took a few of the caps and arranged them in a solid foundation. Then he showed Finn how to build the next layer inward. The boy watched, his large, curious eyes fixed on Elias's hands. Together, they built a small, stable tower. Finn looked at the structure, then up at Elias, and a small, rare smile touched his lips. In that smile, Elias felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't power or success or pride. It was connection, a simple, unadorned human connection. But the moment was fleeting. Maya, who had been watching from the doorway, had a complicated expression on her face. It was not anger, but a deep, sorrowful confusion. "You've been different, Leo," she said later that night, after Finn was asleep. "Ever since that bad night. It's like you're a stranger in his body." Elias's heart stopped. He had been so consumed by his own internal war that he had forgotten he was an actor on a stage, and his audience was watching closely. I'm just tired, Maya. The factory." "No," she interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's more than that. The old Leo, he was a good man, but he was worn down. He had given up. He never would have played on the floor with Finn. He never would have looked at the world with such anger, such surprise. You look at everything like you're seeing it for the first time. Sometimes, when you look at me, it's like you don't know who I am." He had no answer. He could not tell her the truth. The truth was an insanity that would shatter what little stability she had. He was a cuckoo in her nest, a ghost inhabiting her husband's skin. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on him. He was not only robbed of his own life, he was stealing someone else's. "I'm sorry," was all he could manage. That night, sleep brought a new kind of vision. It was not a memory, but a synthesis, a fever dream born of his clashing realities. He was in his old boardroom, the long, polished mahogany table stretching before him. His board members were there, but their faces were the gaunt, grease-stained faces of the workers from the scrap line. Foreman Graves stood where his vice president should have been, and at the head of the table, in his chair, sat Maya. She was not the tired woman from the tenement, nor the polished wife of the benefactor. She was something in between, her eyes holding both the weight of her old life and the authority of her new one. "The numbers are down, Elias," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Your empathy output is lagging. Your sorrow is unproductive. Your guilt shows a poor return on investment. The system requires gratitude, not grief. What is your proposal to correct this?" He tried to speak, but no words came out. He was paralyzed. He looked down at his hands, expecting to see them clean and manicured, but they were the raw, bleeding hands of Leo Kolchak. He looked for his reflection in the polished table, but the face that stared back was a terrifying composite, half his own, half the imposter's. He woke with a gasp, his heart pounding. The dream had laid his conflict bare. He was trapped between two worlds belonging to neither. He was mourning a life of gilded emptiness while living a life of authentic suffering he couldn't accept. The inversion hadn't just switched his circumstances. It had put his very soul on trial. It was forcing him to question everything he had been. Was the ruthless CEO the real him? Or was the broken man learning empathy the person he was supposed to become? He reached into his pocket and closed his fist around the smooth, carved stone. The symbol. It was the only thing that belonged entirely to him, a bridge between the man he was and the man he had become. He couldn't go back. He was beginning to realize that perhaps he shouldn't want to. But he couldn't stay here either, a ghost in another man's life, watching a child sicken in a world of manufactured gratitude. He had to find a third path. He had to find the meaning behind the inversion. He looked at Maya, sleeping beside him, her face etched with worry even in slumber. He looked at Finn, curled into a small ball, his breathing shallow. His fear was no longer just for himself. It was for them. And intertwined with that fear was a new, terrifying, and profound question that kept him awake until the shivering dawn. If he could somehow reverse this, if he could reclaim his old life, would he be condemning this woman and child back to a life of slow decay? What was the price of his own salvation? The factory, once a symbol of his degradation, was slowly becoming his proving ground. The daily grind, the physical toll, was no longer just a punishment. It was a crucible. Elias, or the man who was now Leo, began to apply the forgotten faculties of his old life to the problems of his new one. He was a problem solver by nature, a systems analyst. He had built an empire by identifying inefficiencies and exploiting them. Now, his focus was not on profit margins, but on survival. He started observing the scrap line not as a river of torment, but as a data stream. He noticed the inefficient distribution of workers, the recurring choke points where the belt would jam, causing hazardous pileups. He saw how Foreman Graves, a man who had risen to his position through sycophantic loyalty to the new regime, mismanaged his team, his commands driven by petty cruelty rather than logic. Graves was a new noble, one of the formerly downtrodden who now wielded his minor authority like a king's scepter, proving that cruelty was not the exclusive domain of the born rich. An opportunity arose during a torrential downpour. Rain lashed against the factory's corrugated iron roof, and a leak that had been dripping for weeks finally burst, sending a cascade of water down onto a critical electrical junction box near the main conveyor. Sparks flew in a terrifying display, and the entire line shuddered to a halt with a deafening groan. Panic erupted. Workers scrambled back, fearing electrocution. Graves stood, shouting uselessly, his face pale with fear. In that moment of chaos, Elias's mind went unervingly calm. He saw the problem, the variables, the solution. The main power cutoff was on the far side of the factory, too far to reach in time before the shorting junction box blew the entire sector's grid. But he remembered seeing a secondary, local breaker panel near their station, a relic from an older system that everyone ignored. "The panel!" he shouted over the din, his voice carrying the unfamiliar ring of command. "Under the west gantry. Cut the power there." A few workers stared at him, dumbfounded. He was just Leo, the quiet one with a low gratitude score. But his certainty was magnetic. One man, an older worker named Ben, his face a roadmap of hard years, hesitated for a second and then nodded, scrambling towards the gantry. Meanwhile, a younger worker had slipped on the wet floor and fallen perilously close to the sparking, water-drenched junction box. He lay stunned, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Graves was screaming for everyone to stay back, his authority dissolving into hysterics. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed a long, dry wooden plank used for prying open crates. He knew from his long-forgotten physics classes that wood was an insulator. "Stay still," he yelled at the fallen man. Just as Ben threw the breaker switch, plunging their section into a sudden, eerie silence, Elias reached the man. Using the plank, he carefully pushed a heavy piece of scrap metal that had pinned the man's leg, freeing him. Other workers, their fear broken by his decisive action, rushed forward to help carry the injured man to safety. In the aftermath, as the emergency crews arrived, Elias faded back into the crowd. But he hadn't gone unnoticed. Foreman Graves, his authority momentarily shattered, looked at him with a new expression, a venomous mixture of suspicion and resentment. He had been shown up, and by a lowly scrap sorter. Later, as they were cleaning up, the old worker, Ben, approached him. "Never seen that breaker used," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Saved us from a real disaster. Maybe save that kid's life. You think fast, Leo. You're not like the others. Just got lucky," Elias mumbled, trying to deflect the attention. Ben just grunted, a knowing look in his eye. Before he turned to leave, he pressed something into Elias's hand. It was a folded, grimy piece of paper. Elias waited until he was alone before unfolding it. On it was a crudely drawn map of a back-alley intersection a few blocks away and a time, midnight. Below the map was a symbol, a spiral, interwoven with a straight line. Elias's blood ran cold. It was the same symbol as the one on his stone. This wasn't a coincidence. Ben knew. He knew what the symbol meant. The old man wasn't just a factory worker. The decision to go was not a choice. It was a compulsion. This was the first real clue, the first thread he could pull to unravel this nightmare. That night, he waited until Maya and Finn were asleep. He looked at the boy, whose cough seemed a little easier, a small mercy. His actions at the factory had, ironically, boosted his gratitude rating for the day. The system was so absurdly simple. Avert a crisis, your productivity spikes, and you are rewarded. He had earned them a slightly higher place on the clinic's waiting list. The thought was both gratifying and grotesque. He slipped out of the tenement, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The district was even more menacing at night. The shadows were deeper, the silence punctuated by distant sirens and the cries of unseen things. He navigated the labyrinthine streets, following the crude map. The designated meeting point was a dead-end alley behind a defunct butchery, the air still thick with the phantom smell of old blood. He waited, hidden in a doorway, every nerve alight. Was this a trap? Was Graves trying to get rid of him? Finally, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Ben. He was not alone. Two other figures, a man and a woman, flanked him. They were all dressed in the same drab workers' clothes, but their eyes were different. They were alert, sharp, and they held none of the defeated weariness of their peers. "You came," Ben said, his voice losing its folksy rumble and gaining a harder edge. "We weren't sure you would. The stone, you recognized the symbol." "It was mine," Elias said, his voice tight. "From before this." The three of them exchanged a look. "We call it the mark of waking," the woman said. Her name was Lena. "A few of us have them. Objects from our past lives that somehow crossed over. A locket, a cufflink. For you, a stone. We don't know why, but it's how we find each other." Elias's mind reeled. "A few of us? You mean, you all remember? You're like me?" "We are the remnants," the third man, Kale, said. He was younger, with a fiery intensity in his eyes that bordered on fanaticism. We remember the world that was. We were bankers, lawyers, artists, engineers. Now we're this. He gestured at his own grimy clothes with disgust. We remember the inversion. The relief that washed over Elias was so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He was not mad. He was not alone. For weeks, he had been an island of sanity in a world of collective amnesia. Now, he had found other castaways. How many? Elias asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. We found a dozen in this sector, Ben explained. Maybe a few hundred across the city. We have to be careful. The new nobles are paranoid. They hunt for anyone who shows signs of malcontentment or ingratitude. They know something's wrong, but they don't know what. If they found out some of us remember. He didn't have to finish the sentence. This meeting was his first trial, a test of his courage to step out of the shadows. The accident at the factory was the second, a test of his character, forcing him to use his old skills not for profit, but for people. He had passed. He had found his way to this secret fraternity of the dispossessed. For the first time since he woke up in this living hell, a fragile, dangerous flicker of hope ignited within him. He was no longer just a victim. He was a member of a resistance. But as he stood there in the dark alley, surrounded by his fellow ghosts, the hope was tinged with a new and potent fear. Cale, the intense young man, stepped closer, his eyes burning with a cold fire. Finding each other is just the beginning, Cale whispered, his voice laced with a raw, desperate energy. We don't believe this is permanent. We believe it can be undone, but it will take a catalyst, a shock to the system, and we think we know what, or who, that catalyst has to be. He looked directly at Elias, his gaze piercing. The man who stole your life, the one they call the benefactor, he's not the only one living in your penthouse. There's also the woman who stole your wife's life. Tell us, Elias Vance, do you know where to find your wife? The question hung in the cold, damp air of the alley. A blade pointed at the heart of Elias's most vulnerable secret. His wife, Helena, or rather, the woman who now wore Helena's face and name, the woman he had seen on the news broadcast, the woman who had been Maya, his weary tenement wife, just weeks ago. Anya, that was her real name. He had heard Maya, no, the real Maya, his current wife, mutter it in her sleep once, a name from a life she couldn't remember. Anya Rostova. Her name is Anya, Elias said, the words tasting like ash. She is the wife of the man I've become. It was a dizzying, paradoxical statement, a snake eating its own tail. Cale nodded, a grim satisfaction on his face. We thought so. The inversion seems to have a sixth sense of poetry. It didn't just swap individuals, it swapped counterparts. The CEO for the factory worker, the wife for the wife. The remnants led Elias from the alley into the city's hidden veins. Their base was not a single location, but a network of secret spaces, a forgotten cellar beneath a bakery, a sealed-off service tunnel in the transit system, a high-up room in a derelict clock tower. Here, in these pockets of oblivion, the dispossessed elite of the old world gathered. Elias met a former surgeon who now cleaned sewers, a celebrated novelist who now packed nutrient paste into tubes, and a brilliant physicist who now repaired rusted machinery. They were all ghosts, haunted by the lives they had lost, and united by the impossible truth they carried. It was in the clock tower, with the city's grim panorama spread below, that Ben and Lena laid out the full, terrifying scope of their discoveries. The Great Inversion, as we call it, was not a localized event, Lena explained, her voice low and precise. She was a former data scientist, and she had pieced together their new reality with fragments of information. It was global, instantaneous. At 3:33 a.m., Universal Time, every human being with a net worth over 10 million credits swapped consciousness with a randomly selected individual from the bottom economic quintile. Elias felt a wave of vertigo. It wasn't just him. It was his entire class. His friends, his rivals, his partners. All of them, waking up in slums and favelas and desolate farmlands across the globe. And all of the people they had once flown over, driven past, and ignored were now sitting in their boardrooms, sleeping in their beds. But why? Elias asked, the question that had tormented him for weeks. An act of God? An alien experiment? A revolution? We don't think it was an act of man, Ben said, his gaze distant. There was no technology, no warning. It was metaphysical. Some of us think it was a balancing. The universe, like any complex system, seeking equilibrium. The scales of wealth and poverty became so unbalanced that the system simply snapped. A hard reset. Cale scoffed at this. Equilibrium? This isn't balance, it's a joke. They've made the same mistakes we did, just faster. They preach empathy while building a surveillance state. They talk of gratitude while their children get sick from the same smog. They are becoming us, just with less style. His bitterness was a palpable force in the room. The most startling revelation was yet to come. The inversion isn't stable, Lena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. The new reality is thin. We've all experienced it. We call them flickers. She described moments of temporal and spatial dissonance. A remnant would walk down a grimy alley and, for a split second, see the manicured hedge of their old garden. Another would taste the bland nutrient paste and, for a fleeting instant, savor the rich flavor of a steak they had eaten a year ago. Elias thought of the stone in his pocket, a permanent flicker, a piece of the old world that had somehow become lodged in the new. These flickers are becoming more frequent, more intense, Lena said. Our physicist, Eris, he has a theory. He believes the two realities, the old and the new, are still entangled. They're vibrating at different frequencies, but sometimes they align. The flickers are the moments of near alignment. Eris believes a total alignment is inevitable, a moment when the veil will be at its thinnest. He calls it the convergence. The convergence. The word hung in the air, filled with a terrifying promise. A chance to what? Elias asked, his heart pounding. To go back. A chance to force a reversal. Cale cut in, his eyes blazing. If, during the peak of the convergence, we can create a powerful enough paradox, a shock to the metaphysical system, Eris believes we can trigger a snapback. We can put the world right again. The room fell silent. The sheer audacity of the idea was breathtaking. To not just survive, but to reverse the apocalypse. To reclaim their stolen lives. And how do we create this shock? Elias asked, already dreading the answer. Cale's gaze was unwavering. The system is built around figureheads. Symbols. The new Elias Vance, the benefactor, is the ultimate symbol of this new world. And his wife, Anya, is its heart. She is the former poor, now living the ultimate dream. She represents the hope of this new order. If she, the poster child for the inversion, were to publicly reject it, to demand the return of the old world, if she could be convinced to help us, to become the key, Elias felt a cold dread wash over him. They wanted him to contact Anya, the woman who was living with his son, Julian, or the boy who was now Julian, the woman who had been given a paradise she never asked for. They wanted him to ask her to burn that paradise to the ground for his sake. She won't do it, Elias said flatly. Why would she? She's escaped hell. Her son is safe, healthy. You wanted to ask her to give that up? To return to this? He gestured vaguely at the grimy window, at the world of smoke and struggle below. You have to make her understand. Cale insisted, his voice rising. You are the only one who can. You are connected to her. You were her husband in this life, just as you were Helena's in the last. She must have some memory, some echo of the man she lived with, the father of her child. The idea was grotesque. To use the phantom memory of Leo Kolchak, a man he had erased, as a tool to manipulate the woman who had replaced his wife. It was a moral labyrinth from which he saw no escape. But the image of his own son, Julian, his face fading in his memory, fought against his hesitation. What kind of life was Julian living now? Was he in a tenement like this one, coughing in the dark? The thought was unbearable. A few days later, a secret was revealed that solidified his resolve. Eris, the physicist, had been working on a device. Not a machine to communicate with the past, but one to detect the flickers. It was a jumble of wires and salvage parts, but it worked. During a particularly strong flicker, the device whined, and for 3 terrifying seconds, the view from the clock tower changed. The smoggy, industrial hellscape vanished, replaced by the glittering, pristine skyline of the old world. Elias saw Vance Tower, his tower, gleaming in the clean air. It was so close, so real, he felt he could reach out and touch it. And then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, leaving the grime and the gray in its place. The vision broke something inside him. The hope was no longer abstract. It was real. He had seen home. That night, he found a way. The remnants had a contact, a disgruntled communications tech in the city's central hub, who owed one of them a favor from the old life. For a price, he could patch a single, untraceable audio call through to a private number. The number for the penthouse in Vance Tower. His hand trembled as he held the makeshift communication device. He was about to speak to the woman who was living his wife's life, sleeping in his bed, and raising another man's child as his own. He was about to ask her to help him destroy her own happiness. The remnants stood around him, their faces tense with anticipation. This was the first move in their impossible war. He gave the signal. The line connected. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. A voice he recognized from the news, but a voice that also held the faint, remembered echo of Maya's weariness. "Hello," she said, her voice cautious. Elias took a deep breath, the air in the cellar thick with the smell of dust and desperate hope. "Anya," he said, the name feeling alien and intimate on his tongue. "My name is Elias Vance. I believe you are living in my home." There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, he thought she had hung up, but then a soft, terrified whisper came through the receiver, a whisper that confirmed everything. "Leo, is that you?" The world inside the Vance Tower penthouse was a universe of silk and silence. Anya Rostova, now known to the world as Helena Vance, walked through its vast, sun-drenched rooms like a wary ghost. It had been weeks since the great inversion, but the splendor still felt borrowed, temporary, like a stage set that could be struck at any moment. She would run her hand along the cool, smooth marble of a countertop or gaze at the impossible view of the city from the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wave of profound dislocation would wash over her. This was not her life, but it was her son's. That was the thought that anchored her, the one she clung to in the dead of night when the memories of her old life, the cold, the hunger, the gnawing fear, threatened to overwhelm her. Her son, Finn, now called Julian, was thriving. The persistent, rattling cough that had been the soundtrack to her fears had vanished in the clean, filtered air of the penthouse. He ate fresh fruit, slept in a warm, soft bed, and was attended by doctors who spoke in gentle, reassuring tones. He was safe. For a mother who had known nothing but the constant threat of his fragility, this safety was a form of salvation so absolute it bordered on the divine. The man who was now her husband, the man the world saw as Elias Vance, was a stranger. He was the body of a man she'd never met, inhabited by the soul of a man she barely knew, a dock worker named Dmitri who had lived 2 floors below her in the tenement. He was kind, in a bewildered, clumsy way. He, too, was haunted by the swap, but he adapted with a simple, pragmatic acceptance. "We won the lottery, Anya," he would say, his eyes wide with a permanent sense of awe. "Our job now is not to question it. Our job is to not screw it up." He threw himself into the role of the benevolent CEO, launching the empathy mandate with the fervor of a true believer. He remembered the struggle, and he genuinely wanted to make things better. But Anya saw the subtle changes power was already working on him. The impatience with servants, the flicker of annoyance at logistical delays, the easy assumption that his pronouncements would be met with immediate agreement. The rot of privilege was a subtle, creeping mold. Anya's own project was more personal. She poured the vast resources now at her disposal into building state-of-the-art pediatric clinics in the lower sectors. She knew exactly what was needed: air filtration units, respiratory specialists, free access to medicine. She fought the new bureaucracy, which was already becoming as sclerotic as the old, pushing past the committees and the gratitude-based resource allocation nonsense. She was trying to assuage a guilt that felt as vast as the sky outside her window. She was trying to be worthy of this unearned paradise. Then came a call. The voice on the other end, speaking her old name, Leo, shattered the fragile peace she had constructed. Leo Kolchak, her husband, the man whose body was now inhabited by the soul of the billionaire Elias Vance, the father of her son. The memory of him was a dull ache, a man defeated by life, a good heart slowly crushed by the weight of poverty. But this voice, it was not Leo's. It was sharp, intelligent, and radiated an intensity that chilled her to the bone. "My name is Elias Vance." Her blood ran cold. The call was a schism, a tear in the fabric of her new reality. It confirmed her deepest, unspoken fear, that the past was not dead, and that the man she had lost was not gone, but merely displaced. Against her better judgment, she agreed to meet him. She couldn't use her high-security transport. That would leave a digital trail. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She disguised herself. In a simple dress, a headscarf, and sunglasses, she took a public transit tube down into the lower sectors, the familiar press of the crowd and the smell of ozone triggering a phantom limb ache for a life she had been so desperate to escape. They met in a deserted park, a patch of brown grass and skeletal trees nestled between two towering stacks. When she saw him, her breath caught in her throat. It was Leo's body, Leo's face, but the way he stood, the intelligence in his eyes, the sheer, coiled energy emanating from him. That was not the man she knew. It was like seeing a familiar vessel suddenly crewed by a powerful and dangerous stranger. "Anya," he began, his voice low and urgent. "You have to believe me. This world, this inversion, it's not permanent. It's a mistake, a cosmic error that can be fixed." He told her everything, about the remnants, the flickers, the convergence. He spoke of a plan to snap back reality, to restore the world to its rightful order. As he spoke, Anya felt a growing dread. He was not just asking for her help. He was asking her to be the sacrificial lamb. "Restore the world?" she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "You mean restore your world? You want your penthouse back, your money, your power?" "I want my life back," he retorted, his composure cracking. "I want my son back. Do you have any idea what it's like? To see your life stolen, to be trapped in this waking nightmare." "A nightmare," she shot back, her own voice rising. "This is a nightmare for you? This was my life. This was our son's life. Do you remember, Leo, or whoever you are, do you remember holding Finn at night, listening to him struggle for every breath? Do you remember standing in line for hours for a loaf of stale bread? Do you remember the hopelessness? Because I do. I remember it every single second of every day in that beautiful, silent prison you call a home. My son is healthy for the first time in his life. He is safe, and you're asking me to take that away from him. You're asking me to send him back to hell so that you can have your heaven back." The words hung between them, raw and brutal. Elias looked stunned, as if he had never truly considered her perspective. He saw only his loss, not her gain. "It's not about the luxury," he said, his voice softening, pleading. "It's about what is right. This is a lie. None of us are who we are supposed to be. And who are we supposed to be?" Anya cried, tears now streaming down her face. "Were we supposed to be poor? Was my son supposed to be sick? This lie has saved his life. What is more right than that?" He had no answer. He could only speak of abstractions, order, truth, identity. She could only speak of the concrete, visceral reality of her child's well-being. They were standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable chasm. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I won't. Please leave us alone. Leave my son alone." She turned and fled, leaving him standing alone in the desolate park. Back in the penthouse, she collapsed, her body shaking with violent sobs. The choice had been agonizing, a vivisection of her own soul. But she had made it. She had chosen her son. But her fear did not subside. It curdled into a cold, sharp paranoia. This Elias Vance, this ghost in her old husband's body, he was desperate. He and his remnants would not give up. They would keep trying. They might try to get to her, or worse, to Julian. They were a threat to the one thing she held sacred, her son's safety. And so, she made a second choice. A choice born not of love, but of terror. She picked up the secure communication line, the one that connected directly to the new head of city security, a former union organizer who now ran his department with ruthless efficiency. She had fought with him over her clinic funding, but she knew he was a man who got results. "I have a security threat to report," she said, her voice cold and steady, unrecognizable even to herself. "A seditious group. They call themselves the Remnants. They are malcontents. They seek to undermine the benefactor and the new harmony. They are planning something." She gave him the location, the clock tower. She didn't give him Elias's name. She couldn't bring herself to do that, but she gave him enough. She told herself it was to protect Julian. She told herself she was neutralizing a threat. But as she put the receiver down, a profound and terrible silence filled the room. In that silence, she heard the echo of her own words, and she knew, with sickening certainty, that she had not just reported a threat. She had committed a betrayal. She had saved her son by sacrificing the man who was once his father. Miles away, in the dark, crowded cellar, Elias was debriefing the Remnants on his failure. The mood was grim. Suddenly, the door burst open. It was one of their lookouts, breathless and pale. "Security forces," he gasped. "They're everywhere. They've hit the clock tower. They're sweeping the sector. They have names. They took Ben. They took Eris." Panic erupted. Cale grabbed Elias by the collar, his face a mask of fury. What did you say to her? You led them right to us." "No, I didn't," Elias protested, but even as he said it, he knew. Anya. She had done this. Alarms began to blare in the street outside. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the pavement above. They were trapped. The hunt had begun. How had they been found so quickly? Who could have betrayed them with such devastating precision? The raid was a brutal, efficient storm. The Remnants, a society of thinkers and dreamers, were no match for the tactical force of the new security apparatus. Elias escaped by a hair's breadth, Cale dragging him through a collapsing sewer tunnel just moments before it was flooded by security teams. They emerged into the rain-slicked streets miles away, soaked, freezing, and hunted. Cale was a man possessed, his grief and fury a white-hot flame. "She betrayed us. The bitch chose her cage of gold," he spat, his voice raw. But Elias felt something else. A cold, hollowing certainty. Anya hadn't betrayed them. She had betrayed him. It was personal, a desperate, maternal act of protection that had doomed them all. He understood her choice, and that understanding was a pain sharper than any anger. He had asked a mother to sacrifice her child on the altar of his abstract ideal, and she had refused. In her place, would he have done any different? The question was a shard of glass in his soul. They were fugitives. Their network was shattered, their safe houses compromised. They were forced to move through the city's deepest shadows, sleeping in ventilation shafts and abandoned cargo containers, surviving on scraps. During those desperate days, Elias saw the city not as a system to be analyzed, but as a living, breathing creature. He learned its rhythms, its hidden paths, its secret heartbeats. And he saw its people. He saw the flicker of defiance in a worker's eye as they subtly sabotaged a machine to force a break. He saw the secret barter economies that thrived in the alleyways, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of the gratitude audit. He saw small acts of kindness, of solidarity, that the system was designed to crush. His greatest refuge, however, was also his greatest risk. He made his way back to the tenement in Sector 7 to Maya and Finn. He appeared at their door in the dead of night, a haggard specter. He expected to be turned away. He was a danger to them, a wanted man. Maya simply opened the door wider. She didn't ask questions. She saw the desperation in his eyes, and that was enough. She cleaned his wounds, gave him the last of their bread, and hid him in a small, secret crawl space behind a loose panel in the wall, a hiding place the real Leo must have built. Hiding in that cramped darkness, listening to the sounds of the small family on the other side of the wall, Elias underwent his final transformation. He listened to Maya humming a lullaby to Finn, her voice a thin but resilient thread of love in the oppressive squalor. He heard Finn laugh, a sound that pierced his heart, a reminder of both the son he had lost and the son he had, in a strange way, found. He realized his quest had been tainted by a profound selfishness. He had been fighting to reclaim his past, his identity, his privilege. He had seen the inversion as a problem to be solved, a wrong to be righted, so that he could be whole again. But listening to Maya's quiet strength, her unquestioning act of grace in sheltering him, he finally understood. The inversion was not a problem. It was a revelation. It had stripped away the artifice of wealth and status and revealed the naked truth of human character. It had shown him the hollowness of his own past life and the unexpected depth of the people he had once considered invisible. He had been so obsessed with getting back to the top of the pyramid that he had failed to see the humanity holding it up. His choice was no longer about reversing the inversion. Kale, who he met with in secret one last time, was still consumed by that goal. His plan was now one of violence. The convergence was days away, and he intended to use it. He and the few remaining remnants planned to bomb the city's central power grid at the exact moment of the convergence, believing the massive physical and metaphysical shock would force the snapback. A cleansing fire, he had called it. Elias saw the madness in his eyes. Kale had become the very thing he hated, a man willing to burn the world to build his own version of paradise. It would be another revolution, another cycle of chaos and suffering, the new poor becoming the new rich. The snake would continue to devour its own tail. Elias saw a different path. Not reversal, not restoration, but truth. The system of control, both the old one of capital and the new one of gratitude, functioned because of a shared, unquestioned reality. The inversion had created a new reality, but it was a lie, sustained by the amnesia of the masses. What if, instead of trying to turn back the clock, he simply told everyone what time it was? His choice crystallized into a plan of terrifying simplicity and immense risk. During the convergence, when the veil between the two realities was at its thinnest, he would not try to force a reversal. He would do the opposite. He would use the metaphysical energy of the event to broadcast the truth to the entire world. He wouldn't just tell them about the inversion. He would try to make them feel it. Eris, before he was captured, had theorized that during the convergence, memories could bleed through. If he could hijack the global broadcast system, the very system the benefactor used for his empathy mandates, he could become a conduit. He could broadcast his own memories, his own truth, and perhaps trigger the dormant memories in everyone else. He would not restore the old world. He would shatter the new one's illusions. He had to get to the global communications tower. It was the most secure building on the planet, the new system's brain and voice. It was a suicide mission. The night before the convergence was predicted to begin, he emerged from the crawlspace. Maya was waiting as if she knew. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have to," he said. "There's something I need to do." He looked at her, the woman who had shown him more kindness than he had ever deserved, the wife of the man he had displaced. "Maya, I'm not your husband. My name is Elias Vance." He expected shock, disbelief, fear. Instead, she just looked at him with those deep, weary eyes, and a sad smile touched her lips. "I know," she whispered. "I've known for a while. You have a good man's heart, Elias Vance. But it's not Leo's." The simple, quiet acceptance of his truth broke him open. He had been seen, not as a CEO, not as a factory worker, but as a man. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "The man you were before," she said softly, "the one who lived in the sky while we lived in the dirt. We have done this? Would he have risked his life for an idea?" The question was the final test. He thought of the old Elias, the man of cold logic and ruthless ambition. That man would have found a way to profit from the chaos, to claw his way back to power. He would never have chosen this. "No," Elias said, the admission both a confession and a liberation. He wouldn't have. He walked out of the tenement and into the night, no longer fighting for the man he was, but for the man he was trying to become. He was heading for the heart of the system, with the full force of the state hunting him and Kale's fanatics plotting their own violent apocalypse. The convergence was coming. The world was holding its breath, and he was walking into the storm, armed with nothing but the truth. But as he looked up at the communications tower, a needle of light in the dark sky, he wondered, what happens to a world that is suddenly forced to look in the mirror and see the face of a stranger? The global communications tower was a fortress of glass and steel, a vertical monument to the new world's power. It hummed with a contained energy, its spire scraping a sky bruised with the colors of the imminent convergence. The air itself felt thin, vibrating with a low, subaudible frequency, as if reality were a drum skin pulled taut to the point of breaking. Elias moved through the outer security perimeter like a wraith, using the knowledge he had gleaned from his days as a fugitive, service tunnels, maintenance schedules, the blind spots in the surveillance grid. He was no longer a CEO delegating action. He was the action itself, his body lean and hard from weeks of hardship, his mind stripped of all but a single, crystalline purpose. He wasn't alone. A handful of workers from the factory, led by the old man Ben, who had somehow evaded capture, created a diversion at the main gate, a staged protest that drew the bulk of the security forces. It was a sacrifice, and Elias felt the weight of it with every step. He was moving on the strength of other people's hope. Inside, the tower was a sterile labyrinth. He was making his way towards the central broadcast chamber, the sanctum sanctorum, when his path was blocked. Kale and his two remaining remnants stood before him, their faces grim, carrying heavy bags. "Elias," Kale said, his voice devoid of its usual fire, replaced by a chilling calm. "Don't interfere. We're doing what's necessary. We're taking our world back. By blowing it up," Elias countered, keeping his voice even. "You'll kill thousands, Kale. You'll just flip the board again. The oppressed will become the oppressors. It never ends. It ends with me back in my home, with my life," Kale snarled. "That's all the justice I need." The confrontation was inevitable. Kale lunged, not with a weapon, but with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Elias, however, was no longer the soft intellectual. The factory had forged him into something harder. He didn't fight with rage, but with a cold, desperate efficiency, using his knowledge of leverage and momentum. It was a clumsy, brutal struggle, a collision of two broken men in a silent, white hallway. As they fought, the world outside began to unravel. The lights in the corridor flickered violently. Through a window, Elias saw the smog-choked sky tear open for a second, revealing a glimpse of a perfect azure blue. A flicker, a massive one. The convergence was beginning. Suddenly, the security doors ahead of them hissed open. Not with guards, but remotely. Anya's work. From her gilded cage, watching the chaos unfold on security feeds, she had made her final choice. It was not a choice for him, or for the past, but against the violence Kale represented. It was a choice for a chance at something new. Elias shoved a stunned Kale aside and sprinted through the open doors, sealing them behind him. He was in a broadcast chamber. It was a cathedral of technology, a circular room with a 360-degree wall of screens, all currently showing the panic face of a news anchor. In the center was the master broadcast console. He threw himself at the controls, his old tech instincts taking over. He bypassed firewalls, rerouted signals, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. He was locking out the system, seizing control of the global feed. On the screens around him, the anchor's face was replaced by his own, the haggard, determined face of Leo Kolchak. He took a deep breath. The floor beneath him was vibrating intensely now. The air shimmered. He could feel the memories, his own, and something more, a collective unconscious, surging within him. He leaned into the microphone. "My name is Elias Vance," he began, his voice echoing across the planet, into every home, every factory, every public square. "But you might know this face as Leo Kolchak. And that is the truth of our world. He didn't just speak. He opened the floodgates of his own mind. He pushed his memories into the broadcast, amplified by the energy of the convergence. He showed them the cold, sterile beauty of his penthouse, the taste of champagne, the feeling of absolute power. He showed them the casual cruelty of his ambition, the dismissal of his son's love. Then he showed them the other side, the shivering dawn in the tenement, the rust and the rain, the feel of coarse sheets, the gnawing hunger. He broadcast the pain of his cut hands, the ache in his back, the terror in Maya's eyes as Finn coughed in the dark. He projected the simple, profound joy of building a tower of bottle caps with a little boy. Across the planet, the lie shattered. In mansions and penthouses, the new nobles clutched their heads, the phantom pains of their old lives returning, the ache of an old factory injury, the sting of a foreman's insult. In the slums and the stacks, the new poor felt the ghost of silk on their skin, the memory of a confidence they no longer possessed. A dockworker in Mumbai suddenly remembered the precise legal phrasing of a multi-billion-dollar merger. A wealthy socialite in London wept as she recalled, with perfect clarity, the face of the daughter she had to give up for adoption in her old, impoverished life. It was not a reversal. It was a revelation, a global awakening. Everyone now had two sets of memories, two lives warring within them. The world was plunged into a shocked, silent chaos. Elias's broadcast was over. He slumped against the console, utterly spent. He had not fixed the world. He had broken it open, exposing the wound at its heart. He looked at the screens. His face was gone, replaced by billions of faces, all looking out with the same expression of profound, terrifying, and liberating confusion. The resolution was not a grand battle or a magical reset. It was a quiet, human apocalypse. The empathy mandate and the gratitude audits collapsed overnight, meaningless in a world where everyone remembered both sides of the coin. The new nobles could no longer lord their benevolence over a populace they now remembered being a part of. The new poor could no longer be placated, for they remembered what it was to have power. The systems of control, both old and new, were short-circuited by the sudden, universal onset of empathy. The story ends not with a conclusion, but with a question posed to all of humanity. In the penthouse, Anya held her son, who was looking at her with confused eyes, a faint memory of a cramped, cold room clouding his young face. She looked out at the city, where the rigid order was dissolving into an uncertain future. She had not gotten her old life back, nor had she secured her new one. She was simply Anya, a woman who had been both rich and poor, powerful and helpless. And she finally understood. Elias Vance was never seen again. Some say he was captured in the aftermath. Others say he simply walked out of the tower and disappeared into the chaotic world he had created, becoming just another man with two sets of memories. His story became a legend, a myth whispered in the new communities that began to form in the ashes of the old order. Communities built not on wealth or gratitude, but on the shared, painful memory of what it was to be on the other side. The Great Inversion was not a punishment or a reward. It was a lesson. It had held up a mirror to humanity, and now, finally, everyone could see. The final, lingering question, left echoing in the static of a world reborn, was not about rich or poor, power or servitude. It was simpler and infinitely more profound. Now that you know what it is to be me, and I know what it is to be you, what shall we build together?